The Thief of Faces, a riddle for EIRIK GLEE by Jonathan Rowe. Chapter 1. The mists cleared from the fjord, and our longship glided in. Dripping wharves appeared, and mean houses huddled together. Another out-of-the-way fjord, another backwater town. The mead hall rose above the rooftops on timbers. Here was the famous golden-roofed hall. The famous golden-roofed hall was just thatched straw, now mildewed green after the rains of autumn. Straw it was, not gold at all. I felt like blaming Rapp for my disappointment, but it was my own fault. Me, the poet, taken in by a simple metaphor. I wanted to spit with disgust, but it was so cold the spittle froze on my beard, so I settled for inventive cursing, drawing on the private parts of gods and trolls equally. What was I doing in this wintry midden? Thurstang, they called this place. It sheltered on a fjord that curved like a snake between two brooding peaks. The firs marched up to where the thunder lurked above the mountain tops. I sniffed the air. Even my landsman's nose could smell a storm coming up through the straits. Filthy chunks of ice bobbed in the waters and creaked against the sides of the ship as she slipped into the docks. The fog thickened. The storm was going to be a bad one. Thursday. I examined my new home through the dusk. The tanning pits beyond the wharves reeked even in the cold. The waters churned with blood and feces pouring from the slaughter pens. Cattle came here to be killed and turned into boots and belts and all things leather. I'd be eating a lot of beef this winter, that much was certain. My new friend, Rapp Squintbrow, hauled himself onto the wharf, shouting for the harbour master, who didn't appear. The oarsman loaded goods onto the wharf side. I stayed put. This vessel would surely turn back for Kaopang. I would stay abroad and escape, to the warm taverns and expensive whores, and risk the fury of King Harold's henchmen. But that was not my weird, and twist as he may, no man escapes his fate. At any rate, I wasn't escaping mine. Thunder echoed between the gloomy cliffs. Behind us, the fjord and the open sea were lost in an oncoming darkness. A storm was blowing in. I'd come to Thurstang and its golden-roofed hall, and for better or worse, I would not be leaving soon. The god Odin would have his jest at my expense, after all. Harbour torches roared and flapped in the rising wind. Sleet came with it. I clutched the satchel with my harp in it and looked up at the barn that was the golden-roofed hall. It was time to get inside. Though I'd landed in a sewer, it would at least be a warm one. Surely, Odin's spite was satisfied now. I was wrong about that, of course. Rapp! I called to my companion as he climbed the steps to the hall. What exactly happened to your last poet, old Olaf? Rapp shouted an answer, and the rising wind caught his reply and blew it away. I saw him make his introductions and enter. Now it was my turn. Guards waited at the enormous doors, their arms folded. There are formalities for getting into a mead hall, even when there's no one inside but a bunch of old women beating the moths out of the tapestries. When there's an event, like a big Yule feast, then everyone's on their best behaviour and the sentries want to earn their silver. This means lengthy introductions, with sentries standing under the eaves, close to their big warm braziers, and you standing in the rain, shivering and sneezing. You have to name yourself, and your tribe, and all your ancestors, back to a god. Then you hand over your weapons, and if you've got a sword like me, then you have to name that, and all its owners, and everyone it ever killed, all the way back to the smith that forged it. If the sentries are feeling mischievous, they'll make you repeat it, and try to catch you out. I pulled a patch over my empty eye socket and began my family tree. EIRIK GLEE am I, son of... Just handed over the sword. Really? I shouted through the rising storm. Don't you want to know who I've killed with it? I've got half a dozen different ancestries memorized for different occasions, and twice as many blood-soaked histories for my sword, Tunga. It's important your swords killed people the locals might have heard of, but no one they're related to. That takes good judgment. And yes, I own a sword. I was a warrior once, before I lost my eye. The two sentries pulled their fur cloaks tight across their throats. One was an older man, the other a youth. Their fingers were already blue. "You're the poet, aren't you?" said the older guard. "That's what Rap says. Do you kill people with poems? Now hand over the sword and get inside." He was a tall man with iron-grey beard and a patient, humourless manner. "Tunga," I said, handing the sword over. "Your sword's called Tongue." "Yes, because it's so sharp," I said, trying to grin through my chattering teeth. The older guard looked at me as if I was elf-struck, then shook his head at the affections of poets. He looked like the sort of person who preferred swords called Blood-Guzzler and Widowmaker. Nevertheless, he wrapped the sword in a roll of wool and placed it in the store-box under the steps. "Get in then," he said. "The Yule feast is starting. Be hail." "Be hail," I replied, glad to be away from these humorless guards and the plummeting temperature. I stepped through the doors and had a moment of confusion among the heavy drapes that kept out the cold. I thrashed about looking for the slit in the curtain, then someone caught my hand and pulled me through. I stepped blinking into the light. When a bird flies in through the open window of a feast hall, it's stunned by the light and the noise. You can see it zooming around the pillars, bumping into the walls in its confusion, until it finds another window out, back into the stormy night. I felt as the bird must. Voices boomed in my ears, and the odour of roast meat filled my nostrils. Plates of silver and gold lining the walls dazzled me. I gripped my guide's hand and came face to face with the girl. She was lovely. Small, delicate, with wide, laughing lips and sky-blue eyes under a fringe as dark as a raven's wing. Her skin was clear and clean, like those dolls they make in Roos. There's something about sea journeys that makes a man giddy around women. "You must be a goddess," I told her. Her smile widened. "Thank you," she said with a strange accent. A blush crept up her throat. I was composing another gallant remark when I noticed how her hair was shorn short. My goddess was no lady. She was a thrall, a slave girl. How awkward. No sooner into the hall and I'm flirting with the slaves. Some people consider that to be coveting their property. "Show me to the guests' bench," I had to repeat, louder because of the clamour of the feast going on around me. "The bench! Take me there." "This way," she said, with that dazzling smile, and still holding my hand, drew me towards the benches at the side of the hall. The noise died down. "Valka," she said. "I'm Valka." I didn't reply, for two reasons. For one, I was contemplating this lovely thrall. She was extremely short. The goddess Freya and Frigga had blessed her with all the womanly gifts and in delightful proportion to her elf-like height, but the other reason was the table we'd arrived at. 2 rows of faces looked up, slack-jawed, with porridge dripping from their lips. Each of them had ghastly, short-cropped hair. "This is the thrall's bench," I cried. Snatching my hand away, 2 or 3 slaves realized Valka's mistake, grinned, and nudged one another. "But I thought you were one of us." Valka stamped her foot in a haughty gesture, at odds with her low station and height. "What did you mean by what you said to me?" The wretched girl had taken my compliment as some sort of pledge. A beauty like her, stuck among rustic thralls, must hope for a visitor to come one day with a handsome thrall in tow, someone of her low status, but worthy of her affection, and here was I, my hair slicked down with sleet, reduced to my 3rd best shirt, having pawned my better ones, and mistaken for not the honoured guest, but the honoured guest's slave. "What did you say to her?" That was Rapp's voice. His puzzled squint took in the thrall's bench, Valka's blushing breast, and back to me. "He called me his goddess," Valka replied. The impudent cat drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't much, and tipped her chin like a princess boasting of a bride price. The other thralls, being a coarse bunch, hooted with merriment. "Goddess? Aye, the goddess of—" My normal word hoard snapped shut under the laughter and catcalls. "Of dwarfs?" Not my finest put down, but it wasn't the most sophisticated audience. The thralls loved it, the menfolk anyway, and some of the spiteful girls with plainer faces. A couple of the older women scurried to support Valka as she swayed before the unkind laughter. Rapp laughed too, and he pulled me away. Thralls, he chuckled, the pranks they get up to. But watch out for little Valka. She's a great favourite of the Lady Gisla, and the Lady Gisla does no wrong in this hall. There was something I needed to know from Rapp, but it had been driven from my mind. I glanced behind me. The girl sat with her own kind now, but I saw her pale face staring after me with a look that would open graves. Rapp led me between the benches, and I studied my new home. I hadn't been wrong about the silver and gold decorating the pillars. The mead benches were full of warriors, not just the muscled toughs who mooch around the fjords every winter looking for hospitality, but some proper Vikings, showing off their scars, even some tattooed Varangians from Rus in the faraway east. Had I been wrong about this place? The outside was a thatched barn, but there was real sword power under the roof. That's when I remembered what had been bothering me. "Crap!" I shouted in his ear. "You were telling me what happened to the last poet." "Murdered," Rapp replied. He pushed me into a bench and sat opposite me. "Murdered most horribly. Here, drink some beer. And welcome to Thurstang." That was Chapter 1 of The Thief of Faces, a riddle for EIRIK GLEE. If you enjoyed this Viking detective story, have a look for it on Amazon.